Paine Peaks, named after the Torres del Paine in Chile, is a plugin designed as a rhythmic guitar effects processor, inspired by popular guitar hardware from the early 2000s, like Roger Lynn's Adrenaline, but with a focus on modern music production trends. It is available for Windows and Mac OS, both as a standalone application and in VST3 and Audio Unit formats, for use in your favorite DAW. The plugin combines a 32-step rhythmic sequencer with a fully parametric LFO, allowing for very creative sounds and opening up many possibilities for guitarists and producers. The sequencer is made up of a 32-step grid, distributed across 2 bars, and offers 3 operating modes. Tremolo sequencer, where each step controls the volume. Filter sequencer, where each step controls the filter cutoff frequency. Arpeggiator sequencer, where each step generates a note, functioning similarly to the sequencer found in some traditional synthesizers. It also incorporates an LFO, low-frequency oscillator, capable of modulating the sound using different waveforms: triangle, sine, sawtooth, square, and random. Both the sequencer and the LFO run in sync with a BPM, which can be set manually or automatically synchronized with your DAW's tempo. Each step has its own envelope, with attack and decay controls, as well as a general filter with frequency and resonance controls, which allow you to define the cutoff frequency and emphasize it through the Q factor. One of the features that makes Paine Peaks more flexible is the topology selector, which allows switching between 3 different filter engines: biquad, TPT, and comb filter. Most audio plugins use a single filtering algorithm. In this case, I decided to offer 3 alternatives to further expand the sonic possibilities. Another notable feature is the arpeggiator sequencer mode, where not only can you easily change the root note, but you can also choose between quantization by semitones or a microtonal scale, allowing for controlled detuning and much more experimental results. As microtonal music has been gaining increasing interest in recent years, I thought it was an interesting idea to incorporate it into the arpeggiator. That covers, in broad strokes, the main features of the software. Now let's see it in action. Alright, let's move on to the practical demo. The first thing I wanted to show you is the plugin running as a standalone application. This is how it looks on Mac OS. On Windows it looks practically the same, so there are no major differences. But for this demonstration I want to use the plugin as an audio unit inside Logic Pro. As you can see, the interface is exactly the same as the standalone version. The first thing I want to do is an experiment that might be a bit boring, but it helps to understand the more theoretical side of how the plugin works. I have a tone generator here that comes included with Logic. It can generate different waveforms: white noise, pink noise. But in this case I want to use a pulse wave. I have it set to -19 decibels, and this is the sound it produces. It's not a very exciting sound and, obviously, it doesn't sound much like a guitar, but it works perfectly for showing a few things. I also have Oscarizer open, which is a plugin that works as a spectrum analyzer and also as an oscilloscope, so it will allow us to see the waveform in real time. The first thing I want to show you is the filter tremolo, using the LFO as a modulation source. We have 5 waveforms available: triangle, sine, sawtooth, square, random. I'm going to let the tone generator run and start up Paine Peaks. Here we have the run and stop buttons. When I press run, the sequencer starts running. At this point the oscilloscope shows a modulation with a triangular waveform. If I switch the waveform to sine, the change in sound is fairly subtle. If I switch to sawtooth, the character changes a bit more. Then we have the square wave. And finally the random wave, which, as you can see, has a completely different behavior. It doesn't follow a periodic pattern. Instead, it generates random values, just as its name implies. And that would be, basically, how the LFO works when applied to the filter tremolo. Now I'd like to move on to the guitar. I want to show you one of the effects I find most interesting in the plugin, which is filter sequencer. Here we have the 3 main sequencer modes: arpeggiator sequencer, filter sequencer, tremolo sequencer. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, each one uses the steps to control a different parameter. In the case of filter sequencer, each step controls a different frequency. What happens is that certain frequencies in the sound are emphasized according to the value of each of these steps, which can range from 0 to 99. The exact frequency also depends on the frequency knob and the resonance level. In general terms, the useful range goes from approximately 80 Hz up to around 8 kHz, though it obviously also depends on the material we're processing. I'm going to switch to the guitar now. For this demonstration I'm going to use an emulator of the Roland JC120 Jazz Chorus. In this case I'm using a plugin that emulates it, called RC120, as featured in the bias plugin by Positive Grid. Let's first listen to the guitar on its own with the amplifier, without Paine Peaks. And now let's listen to the exact same guitar using Filter Sequencer. As you can see, the yellow cursor is moving through both bars of the sequencer. If we now look at the spectrum analyzer that comes with Logic, I'm first going to play the guitar without the plugin. And we can see that the spectrum stays relatively stable. On the other hand, when I activate Filter Seek, notice how the spectral content is constantly shifting to different areas. That's precisely what Filter Sequencer does. It emphasizes different frequencies as the sequencer moves through each of the steps. The frequency knob defines the general range over which all the steps operate. We could say that it sets the master frequency around which the different sequencer positions will move. On the other hand, resonance increases the emphasis on that cutoff frequency. It's the equivalent of the Q parameter found in many equalizers and filters. Now I'd like to go through some of the presets I prepared. In total I left 14 presets designed as demonstrations, attempting to cover practically all of the plugin's possibilities. Then I left another 14 empty slots so each user can create their own presets. For now it seemed like a reasonable number to me. If more factory presets needed to be added later, that can always be done. In any case, using the save and load functions, it's possible to store a virtually unlimited number of presets on the hard drive, so there's really no significant limitation in that regard. I simply preferred to keep the list organized and not fill it with too many presets from the start. I want to start by showing some of the sounds inspired by songs of the early 2000s and some ideas from Roger Lin's Adrenaline 3 effects processor. For example, this preset is a filter sequencer pattern with sweeping cutoff motion. There's something important I wanted to mention here. This plugin works entirely in mono. The Adrenaline 3 had some stereo panning features, but I decided not to include them. Personally, I prefer to leave that decision in the user's hands. For example, I normally generate the stereo image using a delay, and for that I usually use the H delay by Waves. I think that kind of processing works better as an independent stage in the effects chain. If I activate the delay, the result changes quite a bit. I'm going to sync it to the same BPM as the project. That would be a preset inspired by Argentine guitarist and singer Gustavo Cerati. This next one also goes along those lines. Let's hear it first without delay. Another filter sequencer which features a pattern with a driving groove. Now let's try adding the stereo delay. Personally, I find it works much better this way. Then come several arpeggiator sequencer presets, also inspired by pop songs from the early 2000s. For example, this one, called Computer Talk, is tuned with snap set to semitones so its transcribed notes play perfectly in tune. And the next one is an alternate transcription of computer talk, also tuned with snap set to semitones. With delay, that character becomes even more apparent. Then we have this preset called Southern Peaks. Here I decided to switch the comb filter topology to biquad. The result lands somewhere between an arpeggiator sequencer and a filter sequencer. Personally, I find it has quite an interesting sound. And with delay. Then there's inertia. I drew quite a bit of inspiration here from the Argentine band Soda Stereo. I wanted to experiment a bit with that sonic aesthetic. As a result, this preset features a filter sequencer pattern with a random LFO sweep driving the filter cutoff. With delay, it gets an even more interesting sound. This next preset has a filter sequencer pattern with tempo synced to the host BPM. In fact, I have a drum track ready to show it better. Let's put it into playback. As you can hear, everything stays perfectly synchronized. Let's now move on to Tremolo Sequencer. I have a preset I'd like to show you using a guitar with distortion. In this case, I'm using an emulator of the Marshall Super Lead, the Lion 68 by Universal Audio. Here I have Tremolo Sequencer selected. Unlike Filter Sequencer, where each step controls a frequency, here each step controls the volume. For this preset, I drew quite a bit of inspiration from the sound of Green Day, specifically Boulevard of Broken Dreams, a very characteristic effect that could also be achieved with the Adrenaline 3 and that I've always really liked. From here on, I started experimenting with much more extreme sounds using the LFO. For example, this preset is called Too Much Resonance. Here the resonance emphasizes the low frequencies enormously, almost as if it were generating a kick drum. It's quite an aggressive effect. Next comes Kinda Wah Wah.
Sonido muy típico del Adrenaline. Voy a bajar un poco la frecuencia quizás ahí.
The next preset is called Triplets. It also uses filter tremolo, but working on a triplet subdivision. I like it quite a bit because it generates a very characteristic pulse.
Me gusta porque suena como tresillos, digamos. Como 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, bien rápido.
Then we have Duckman. Here I started experimenting much more with different filter topologies. In this case, the result is somewhat reminiscent of video game sounds, which is why I decided to give it that name, as a small tribute to Pac-Man. And finally, there's Modem Talking. Here I mainly use the TPT topology, which I personally find very interesting for experimenting. It produces quite unusual results, almost as if old telephone modems were talking. The truth is that with this topology you can achieve some really strange and quite creative sounds. Everything from preset 15 through 28 has been reserved so you can create your own presets. The idea is that you have a starting point, but also enough space to develop your own ideas. That would be the complete tour of Paine Peaks. I know the video ended up being a bit long, but it seemed important to me to explain all the plugin's features with a certain level of detail so you could really understand how it works. I genuinely hope you enjoy it. I hope you try it out, and, of course, I hope you buy it if you're interested in supporting the project. The plugin is now available through the Acodestics website, and if you end up using it, I'd love for you to share the sounds you create. That's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching.